Hey everyone, welcome to the Under Construction Podcast, where we cover the tips, tricks, knowledge, skills, and abilities that help you to grow in your career. The format of this podcast has changed a little bit through time, where we now include interviews from folks who have gone before us and they share what has allowed them to be successful, but also some practical tips, behaviors, or actions that you can take to actually experiment and drive your own. Enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Under Construction Podcast. Today, April and I are going to have a really cool conversation. We are going to be talking about how do we not compare ourselves to other people and how do we own things that are ours to own but not someone else's. April, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, John. How are you?
I am doing good. We're recording this in the fall, middle of September, and hay fever is kicking my butt, so you guys may hear some chops in the audio this one where I'm cutting out me coughing on all of my allergy issues. But I can't control that. I can control some things, but I can't control everything. When it comes to this concept of owning what we can own, but not comparing ourselves to other people and what they own, what are some tips that you would share with folks on how to draw the line of I should own this or I want to get better versus this becomes unhealthy?
Well, that's a really good question, John, and I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I'm going to take it back a little bit because I think that in my career I've seen different versions of comparing versus ownership. And what really got me excited about this topic because it's been an evolution, right? And so I remember one of the first things that I heard when I was talking to an individual when I took over the recruiting process, right? And we were hyping up our hiring, and we started to see similar positions across the board. And also as we started going after larger projects and you're trying to get more talent in, the offer was for a similar position, but that offer looked a lot better, right? And I still remember this was early on and coming into these walls and early in my career. And the individual stated, it doesn't matter to me. I made my offer for what was comfortable for me and my family, and I was really great with that offer, and I feel like that I am compensated fairly and that I'm being offered and aligned with the importance and the value to myself. So if I start comparing, well, this offer, right, it includes this much more, it can really get you where you're not focused on the right things. Your work actually is going to falter, your mood, right, and just your just general disposition is going to be off. And so it really stuck with me because, yeah, okay, he or she could have focused on fair and equity. We hear that a lot, right? Versus knowing that they were adequately paid for what they brought to the table, and that if they continue to focus on what they can influence and the best versions in themselves, that other is going to catch up and actually maybe even then surpass, right? And so when we're able to really just focus and what you just stated, work on what we can control versus those things that we cannot, it's going to pay off tenfold in the long run. And so that's what, when I think about this topic, it's really important because it's really easy to get way off track, right? It's really easy to go down that rabbit hole, and then it's really easy to get others to be your cheerleader and jump on the bandwagon, right? Because what friends do naturally tend to want to support when you're feeling down. They want to be, yeah, me too, you're right. Like you should be, about that. And they often don't try to pull you out to make you think big picture. So wanted to say that first. So then let's go back to your initial question. You were talking about how you can be better. Can you repeat that for me?
Yeah, actually, before we go there, I do want to circle back to that because I think that's a good point. First of all, you may be comparing something that other people have no insight in. We see somebody in the public, let's use whatever public figure is in your window, whoever you are listening to this. I'm not going to insult you, but you have somebody that you've just seen and you're like, wow, they've got whatever it is they have. What you didn't see is what they've given up to get that. Right. And what they've done to be able to position themselves to get there. And so many times we're comparing outputs versus inputs, and those are two totally different things.
Yeah.
And the quote is, are you willing to do what I've done to get to where I am, to get what I've got? And that's a great question to ask yourself. Do you know what it takes, and are you willing to do that? But so back to the question, like, how do you help somebody get out of that spiral? You had mentioned, friends, well-meaning, I'm sure, but pulling you down the wrong path of like, oh, you're being maligned, whatever the case may be. What are some ways that we can get out of that and give ourselves the perspective to see what we should own versus what we're comparing, and how we can actually make it to where it's a healthy thing for everyone involved?
Yeah. And I mean, what you just said about those outputs and inputs is a really good reminder, and something you'll probably hear throughout this conversation too. So, in order for us to be reminded, but also help us on this path of making sure that we're focused on the things that we can, that own, versus, those that we can't. One prime example is, when you open up Facebook, do you think someone's really going to put out there all their dirty laundry and that, they failed as a mother or father today, or they were not a great spouse and they hung up on their mother or whatever it is? No, you see these wonderful reels and videos and pictures of this picture perfect life. So people are only putting out there, they're controlling what you see, right? And when you live in that world, so what I'm trying to get at is your circle of influence. When you make a conscious decision on the information that you want to view and spend your time looking at, the people that you choose to have in your life. Now, some we do control, some we don't. So if you're in a work setting, there's going to be people that you have to interact with that maybe that you're not going to be hanging out outside of work, right? But they're there for a purpose too, and I think that's really important, how you can use your different groups to help grow you in other ways that you may not see possible by just keeping those that you like, right? Or that are similar to you. So it's meant to challenge you. And as long as you lean in and don't, overthink it and for, face value what it is, and you guys can help each other. So some of those things is making sure that you're controlling what influences you. So whether it's the people that you surround yourself with, what opportunities you raise your hand for. So a lot of us, to your point on outputs and inputs, we want to say, well, I wasn't given that opportunity, or this is better for them because they just politically know how to play the game, or they were in the right seat at the right time, and all valid points sometimes. But I really do think that if you want something, right, and you see a value either in your home or your organization, it's up to you to create that path, not someone else to create that path. And I think that is really where ownership comes in. And so when you're willing to be like, when you're looking at outwardly at something and you're comparing and you like what that person has versus getting upset that you don't, set goals, right? Set absolute things that can help grow you to get you there. Even in the simplest term, we've talked about it numerous times with your 3-year letter, right? When you write out, right? When you are diligent about putting action to something, you're going to start making little chips away at it. So that's what I mean. It's okay to look and say, I want that, right? Or that's something I aspire to be. And it's what you do with that versus feeling mad or angry or like you were left out or you haven't had the opportunity versus taking the opportunity to run towards it.
I love that. And in my coaching business and now obviously here at the Keeley Companies, I really challenge people to be able to be very clear about what their values are and how they define success. If you listen to the podcast for any amount of time, you'll notice I end most of the podcasts on that question or very close to the end, because you can very easily run the wrong direction based on comparison if you're not clear about what you want and what means something to you. Everyone is motivated by different things. Obviously, I think most people need a paycheck in order to survive. How much of a paycheck do people need is individual. And is it important or is it a necessary evil? Like, there are so many questions that you should be asking yourself when it comes to, is that what I want? And so Or to the other point of, is it behavioral versus thing oriented? Do I want to be the next president, right? Wherever that ends up being. We're coming up on an election cycle in the United States. Depending on when you're listening to this, it may be closer to that. But the answer for me is no, because I'm not motivated by the office or the power. I would be motivated more by being able to make a difference for people. Well, I can make a bigger difference for people given my skills and my finances, X, Y, and Z. So it's just asking yourself, are you looking at it for the prestige and the power or the output? Or are you looking at it for the value that you bring and that you can get out of it? And I think that's really important because success is defined by every individual, not by what the society is saying. When we look at ownership, and I love that you touched on like, hey, we have to say we have to go get something. It doesn't necessarily just come to us. What does ownership look like on a daily basis? Is this something where I need to have my top 10, like these are the things I'm going to accomplish? Is it more I have just like a compass pointing me in a general direction? How do you unpack that concept of ownership for people?
It's going to be different for every person. I would say that your ownership is your motivators. You can kind of say they're one and the same. So, I think that we all have, or hopefully we all have a moral compass, and hopefully we all have not just, a shared set of values when you're in an organization, but also what are those personally for you, and making sure that those always kind of remain in sync. And so once you have that, once you understand really, and let me back up for a minute, because not everyone is in a career. I call a career something that you wake up every day and you get excitement for the most part, that you have an impact and you have a purpose. There can be folks that are in jobs. There can be folks that are in a transition, that they are furthering their education or other means, right, to get to their career. And so it's a stepping stone. And so you can have ownership in all areas, right, whether you're in a job or you're in a career or whatever that may be. But essentially what I try to tell people are, what are going to be those most important things for you to accomplish, that you do that job well and the best of your ability. And the best of my ability is going to be different than the best of your ability. And whenever you're performing at that level, whenever you have clear expectations of what your job is and what the expectation is of you, then you can really create that ownership. It's just really outlining what is it that I have control over and I can influence, and whether it's in a support role or if it's in an owner, and I use ownership lightly there, but there's ownership in a support role, and then there's also ownership from higher up in an organization too.
Absolutely. There's a gentleman that I follow on Twitter, which is now called X. Anyway, his name's Dave Klein. He has great content. I encourage you to go find him on whatever social channels if you find that beneficial. But he's really good about talking about self-management in addition to team management. One of the questions he asked is, did I meet my own expectations? And that's ownership. Really asking yourself, did I live up to what I had expected myself to do? And then getting deeper into it, if you really want to get serious, do a 5 whys. Why was I thinking that? Well, where did I fail? And how do I get better? That's ownership. And that also drives an upward cycle when we're saying, oh yeah, I failed at that. Well, cool, pick yourself up, keep going. But unless you're asking the question, you don't get to that level of ownership, which means you eventually don't arrive at your destination. And that's where that comparison envy part comes in versus the comparison motivating part of it comes in. Let's say you've got somebody who comes in and says, hey, I want to be in this position in this many years. And they're comparing themselves to what either their family had expected of them, what society had expected of them. What kind of coaching would you give them on things that they can do to start making those first steps to get them to start owning a little more?
Yeah, so whatever position or company that they're in, right? So say that they are part of a really large organization and they say, I want to be president in 6 years, okay? that's going to be really harder to do in a big company than it is a small company. So what you want to do is, okay, what are your desires, right? You know, you can have that of your family, but then what are yours? I have this conversation a lot because often they are very different, okay? And especially with folks that are younger in their careers, they're wanting to make someone proud. They're wanting to, sustain maybe a family lineage of, right? Of showing I'm a really good carpenter. My whole family has been doing it. And I want to continue, and I want to be able to have this trade moving on, whatever it may be. But then at the end, like, are you wanting to be a carbon copy of your father or mother, or are you wanting to be your own person? And so taking those pieces of why they are in the seat that they are in, and why are they aspiring to get to wherever they're going, and then making sure that it's aligned with what company they're a part of, what friend group they're a part of, all of those things. So I have a lot of folks that come in and that are probably newly out of college, and they aspire to have a new position every 6 to 12 months because just evolution in general. We have the changing technology, a lot of growth that we've experienced in the last few years that's created opportunity where we actually are putting folks in roles before they're actually ready or before they've obtained the skill set, just because there's a need and we see that they have what we call it factor, right? And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But when you have that ambition and they're willing to just do whatever it takes because they want something more, you sometimes pull people in faster. And so, it just depends on what it is that you want, the skill set, how hard you're willing to try, and if you are at the right size of an organization to provide you that opportunity. So it's so many factors, but when you really are able to write it down and understand, is it really their motivators? Because at the end of the day, if they don't want to do it, if they don't have the desire, if they don't have the wherewithal to put forth the hours, the time, right? Making the commitment where they're going to have to say no to other things there's going to be a disconnect. And so really it's a conversation, John, and a lot of people, they've never been asked the hard questions. They've never really kind of broke it apart. They're just like, well, I want to be able to retire when I'm 30, and I'm kind of making some of these things up, but to the extremes. But I mean, these are, and I'm like, okay, if that's really what you want to do, this is what you have to do now. And when they look at it, they're like, well, I don't want that. I want to be out by 4. I want to play my, rugby game, and I want to be able to watch, my sports and have a beer with a friend every night. Well, then that doesn't align. So that means we're going to push it off a little bit more. So this is really kind of your realistic aspirations this year and build upon them. And then usually with maturity, experience, it kind of can change and evolves. And then sometimes that's how people choose different careers too. And what they thought, once they're in it, it's a different picture and we go a different path. So just really, I would say the biggest is about being true to yourself. And so again, I think people can compare all day long, but until you're willing to step into those shoes and be able to put forth the work and effort to make it happen, you really should not.
I love it. Parting shot for me, I think biggest thing for me, for everybody to take away is ask yourself questions. Don't just run, actually ask the question. And one of the most powerful questions I had heard, and it wasn't early in my career, but it was reinforcing an early career decision I made. Marcus Buckingham, who was a part of the Gallup organization, he's now out on his own. He has an exercise called Love It or Loathe It. He's British, so that's where the loathe comes in, which means hate for those of us on the other side of the pond. What energizes you and what discharges or removes energy from you? That's a great way to help understand if your comparison is going to be healthy or not. If you're wanting to do something that totally de-energizes you, that's probably a bad thing. So ask the questions. That's my big takeaway for everybody. Anything else that you have before we let everybody get back?
No, I really appreciate just the questions I asked, John, and the ability to break into these further, and hopefully, someone that's listening gets a little something out of it, and that can have an impact on them.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Keely U podcast. If you ever have any suggestions for topics or folks that you'd like us to interview, please send those to John Regan at JREGAN@KeelyCompanies.com.